have your timer if you don't want to set it.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a cook-along. So we've been doing these cook-alongs for the last number of months, and it was only open to the paid membership of our YouTube channel. But now we have opened it to everyone, so this may be your first opportunity to see one of these cook-alongs, to cook along with me, to ask questions, which we encourage you to do in the chat part of it. But let me tell you, if this is your first time, I want to make sure that everybody hits the subscribe button. That is really, really important for us to build our channel here, and also to be able to get this wonderful opportunity to learn about traditional Mexican food and to cook along. We will also be doing a lot of the Ask Me Anythings, and we'll do them probably every 5 or 6 weeks. We'll let you know in advance when we're going to do them. And those are really fun because you get a chance to ask me all kinds of things in rapid fire. I will answer your questions without ever having thought about the answers, which can sometimes be rather interesting. But anyway, join us for those as well. Now, for the cook-alongs to really work, I will say you have to have all of your ingredients out, so let's go through the ingredients for this particular cook-along here. So we're going to be making a tomatillo sauce, and we are going to roast tomatillos for that. So if your tomatillos need to be husked, and most people like to rinse them off because they kind of have a sticky substance on them. On a rimmed baking sheet, I put foil on this because they really do they exude some juice that's really hard to scrub off. So we're going to season that with these serrano chilies here and garlic. An onion will go into that. I'm going to be cooking in a fresh rendered pork lard you could use for all of this stuff except for the frying of the fish or the squash. You could use oil or you could use bacon fat. We'll need a little bit of broth to thin the sauce out with. I'm using chicken stock. You could use fish stock. You could use water, vegetable stock. lots of options for that. We're going to be making something that's called Esquites fritos, which is a fried version of the corn dish that is very popular, especially in central Mexico. And so you'll need 3 ears of corn for that. Best to get those shucked already and all of the silk taken off of them. Here's my beautiful halibut that I'm going to be using, but fish fillets. You'll see that there's only 2 here because I'm also going to cook the squash version of this along. Now on the cook-alongs, you will be getting recipes that are sort of different sometimes than what I've published in books. It may be something completely new, but I always try to figure out a way that I can offer choices in the recipe so that if you want to make a vegetable dish, then I'm going to show you how to make the dish that I'm making into a vegetable dish, or in this case into a fish dish. Now we'll need some herbs to season a lot of these things here. Oh, I didn't talk about the squash because I'm going to be cooking some squash, but we have some squash here from the farmer's market and from my garden. Summer squash is the right thing to get here, or if you live near a Mexican grocery store, the little light green calabacitas would be my choice. We've got some herbs here, and I've got cilantro, and I've got epazote. Epazote is the most common for this sauce in central Mexico, but if you can't get it, certainly you could do the cilantro. I've just got it here in a wet towel so that it doesn't dry out and wilt. You'll need some kind of oil to do the final cooking in. I'm going to be using a type of safflower oil, which I really love to use, but it is refined for high heat cooking, and that gives it the best and the lightest flavor. So I've got some of that. I'm just going to pour it into the skillet when we get it going. You'll need 3 pans for this. I'm sorry about that, but that's what we have to have here. We need a big skillet, a 12-inch skillet for doing the final frying of the fish or the squash. We need a pan to do the sauce in, and a smaller skillet to do the esquites fritos in. Now for the coating, the breading on the outside of the fish or the squash, behind me I have a 1/2 cup of flour and some eggs, and then I have cornflakes over here because that is really popular in the northwest corner of Mexico, and I love it. You might have another kind of breadcrumb. My preferred breadcrumb is panko crumbs, but we'll talk about that when we get into that. But I've got that all set up behind me, plus an extra one of those quarter sheet pans there to put the finished stuff on. So the first thing I'm going to say, and you probably have the recipes in front of you, is that I'm going to go slightly out of order because we are going to try to get seamlessly from beginning to end here without a lot of waiting around. So I've got my pound of tomatillos here. I've got my broiler on. I should have said that to you. Add absolutely at the top, because if you don't have your broiler on, it'll take a few minutes for it to fully heat up. I turned mine on just right before we started tonight, and I'm going to broil these to roast them. So I've got the rack in there at the highest position that it'll go to. It's just about 4 inches below the heating element. This is an electric broiler here. Yours may be gas, and you're kind of have to go all the way down to the floor. But I'm going to slide this in at that highest shelf, and it's a very hot oven, and certainly it will roast quickly. I have set my timer over here, so you don't have to set your timer, for 6 minutes, and it will make a really horrific sound when the 6 minutes is up, so that I will listen to it. So while we're roasting those tomatillos on one side before we flip them over, we're going to do the base to this sauce. So I'm turning my pot on. This is a 4-quart pot. You can get away with a 3-quart pot for this one if you have a slightly smaller one than this. I'm gonna, as I said, I'm using this fresh rendered pork lard. Not everybody has access to that. If you live near a Mexican grocery store, you can go back to the butcher's and get the lard that they have there. It's usually the lard that's left over from making carnitas, and so it'll taste like roast pork, and a little goes a long way. It's really beautiful flavor. This is done for us by the farmer that raises the pigs for our restaurant, and he does a high heat rendered pork lard, which is really pure and really beautiful. I do not recommend the hydrogenated blocks of white lard that you can find in most grocery stores. That stuff I don't think has a place in the kitchen. Honestly, I think it's a waste to use it. So I'm going to take roughly 2 tablespoons of this. By the way, I also always save the bacon fat because bacon fat here is just delicious. So if you're like me and you always pour off the bacon fat into a container that you keep in your refrigerator, then I would highly recommend just using that because it will add a smoky flavor to it, which will be absolutely delicious. Now our next thing is to work on the onion here. Now, I always tell you that during the cook-alongs, you should not only gather your ingredients, but if time allows, do the preparation that I talk about in the list of ingredients. That's what we call in the professional kitchen a mise en place. That's what you're setting up so that you do all of the basic stuff first. Now you'll notice that I haven't done that here because to tell you the truth, I'm a fast cook, and so I try to slow myself down so that everybody can cook along together so that I don't leave some people in the dust that are not fast cooks, okay? So I do a lot of my stuff just like right now. So I'm going to put all of this onion into the pan, and I'm going to do it over medium-high heat. And I want to make sure that that I've got enough heat here that I can get these browned in a short order, okay? So it's not long, slow cooking that I'm looking for here. It's rather a quicker brown here. So I want to hear good sizzle, which is what I'm hearing now. I will say medium-high heat. I'm going to just show you what my flame looks like. Now, some people may look at that and go, oh my goodness, no, I would call that super high. Well, for me, that is super high. Okay, and so I'm going to put it down to medium high, which for me is there. Some ranges, it might be high on your range. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about here is the chilies and the garlic because they're going to go in here in this saute as well. There are many different ways to work with garlic. If you are one of those people that likes to work with a garlic press, then just put it through your garlic press. It seems to be all the rage these days to use a microplane grater, and I always keep one here in my drawer, and I could just do that and then grate the garlic. That works really well. For me, by the time I have cleaned all those things up, I could have done it with my knife, and because what I basically do is slice first and then just kind of rock and chop across it to get a really fine mince out of it. Okay, so that's good enough for this. And now I'm going to do the same kind of thing with these chilies. Now, you might be one of those people that wants to cut these all open and take out the seeds and veins. Let's just look in here. You can see that all of the seeds are embedded in the seed pod, what's called the placenta there, and the veins. And this is the part that has all the heat, not the seeds themselves. So if you just took the seeds out, it would still be a very hot chili, but you take the seeds and veins out. In Mexico, they don't really do that because they're looking for heat to come from these chilies. So they, in a sauce like this, would typically just go ahead and put it seeds, veins, and all, and chop it first crosswise like that. Some of you are going to be the ones that to wear some latex gloves when you're doing this kind of chopping here. I think I can do all three of those together. I'm doing it just exactly. You can't put these through a garlic press. You can't use a microplane grater to do these. So you just slice them, and then I'm just going to go back and forth, rocking and chopping. Now, I have to get these pretty small because I'm going to divide this mixture in half, and it's going to, half of it go into the corn part of this, and half of it into the sauce. So I got to rock and chop pretty fast here, back and forth until I get it small. But let's just take a moment to look here at the onions in this pan. I don't know how yours are doing, but mine are starting to brown a little bit. They still haven't started browning too much, but I will say that, okay, there's our 6 minutes, and I'm going to stop that and start it again at 6 minutes. so that I can flip these guys over. So let's look at what the tomatillos look like here. So this is what I'm looking for. Okay, I don't know where is the best place to put this here so that you can see it well. But you can see that there's nice blackening going on and a change of color from the olive color, from the bright green color to the olive color. When I flip this over, you'll see it's still going to be bright green on the other side. So I'm going to roast these fairly darkly, but 6 more minutes will give us what we're looking for there. So just turn them over. They're starting to exude a little bit of juice there, and that's fine. That's what we really want. And now I'm going to slide them right back in under that broiler. The countdown is already happening on that 6 minutes there. I'm starting to see more color here, but I'm not quite finished with my chopping of the chilies. So I'm going to go back to that and get that chopped up nicely, and then divide it into 2 batches here so that I can use some of it for the corn. Okay. So that looks good for me. Come down in here so you can see how fine this one is. But you sort of see it's chopped into very small pieces, and that will help to get its flavor really beautifully, flavor and heat distributed beautifully. And of course you can use as much or as little of the chili as you like for your cooking. I'm going to take this little portion of it and put it right over here. Now let's talk about the herbs that are going to go into this, or the herb. I'm going to use epazote, but you're probably using cilantro unless you live near a Mexican grocery store and can get this beautiful stuff. But in Chicago, all the Mexican grocery stores carry it. And at this time of year especially, you can see this beautiful stuff. And if you're a gardener, it's so easy to grow. I always recommend that you pick it before it goes to seed, because it will blow its seed all over your yard and it will come up everywhere. But I'm going to take this really big sprig of it and take off the leaves. Now, those of you that have cooked a lot in Mexico will know that a lot of times people just throw the whole branch of epazote into the sauce and let it stew around there. I'm going to do something slightly different because I want epazote flavor in the esquites, the corn esquites as well. I got a couple of extra little leaves that I'm going to put there. And so I'm going to cut this up, but I'm going to cut it up in what in the professional kitchen we would call a chiffonade, which basically just means a very thin slice. So really bunch up your epazote so that you can go down. Now I don't go down like this because I think it's dangerous. I can cut my finger. I always keep the tip of my knife down all the time, and then I just move my fingers back, inch them back, and then cut down through it like that, making very, very thin slices of this epazote. That may sound like a really fancy thing to do, but I will tell you, cooks in Mexico do it all the time, no matter whether they're cooking in a street stall or a fancy restaurant. And they do that with epazote exactly the same way. Okay, so we've got now all of our stuff. Let's look over here at we've got some nice browning going on here. There, I would say that they're getting toward what I would call richly browned now. Let me just pick it up so that you can sort of see what's in there now. And I think they're very soft. They're getting nicely browned, so hopefully yours are getting browned as well. I'm going to take the garlic and throw that in here with half of this. This is going to be a spicy sauce, I can tell you that. So I went with a full bore, all 4 of the serranos here. So I'm going to put all of that in there, and we'll cook that for a couple of minutes here. Now, probably you want to stand back from the pot when you put those chilies in there, because capsaicin, the hot part of the chili, is volatile into the air, and it will make you cough like that. So I kind of stand back for a minute. You might want to have a fan on or I don't have an overhead exhaust on this stove here. So I just have to kind of stand back from it a little bit. But I'm smelling the garlic, I'm smelling the green chilies, I'm seeing the beautiful onions that are browned now. And we're going to do this sauce in a blender, but you could use a food processor if you want. When I was going through all the equipment that we needed at the first, I didn't say anything about a blender. It's the most common piece of electric kitchen equipment that you have in Mexico. So I'll take that mixture now, and I'm going to just put it into here, kind of letting as much of the oil or the fat stay in the pan as possible. So I'm just going kind of slow here. I think I will need to have a little bit more of that fat. There's our 6 minutes. I couldn't have ever expected that that would time out just like that. So let's take a look now at our tomatillos. They look really beautiful. This is a great example of when I write about roasting tomatillos, what it should look like. Okay, I'm turning that broiler off. Okay, so take a look at this. You see all that juice there? You see how dark they are on the top? That's absolutely perfect. So I'm going to take all of the tomatillos and put them here. And then I will tip the tray up and get all that juice in there. That juice is so delicious. It's sort of caramelized a little bit as it kind of comes out of there because it's under the broiler. And it gives you this really beautiful sweetness against the natural tanginess of the tomatillos. Okay, here's a physics lesson for you, just to make sure that since we're going fast through all of this stuff, I'm not letting any of this stuff cool down. You could go slower than what we're going here and let it all cool down. But if you want to blend any kind of hot substance at all, then you have to take this out, because when you blend anything hot, it'll expand, and so it'll blow the top right off of this thing. And I have actually done that before, and it's not nice because all this hot liquid will fly right out of the blender. I usually take a little damp towel and put it over the top just in case any of the splashing should come up at me. And then I'm just going to turn it on, and I want to actually get this to a coarse puree. I don't want it to be too fine. So I'm going to just kind of turn it on and off a few times. Much different than if you're doing it in a food processor, you just hit the pulse button. Or maybe you have a pulse button on your blender as well. Okay. I think it's just about right for me. I want to see some texture in there. So let's take a look at it. I think mine is about right there. So let's look with this. Okay, so I'm liking that. I think this is going to be really beautiful with this. Okay. So our next step is to cook this sauce base down. I'm going to do it in the same pan. I'm not even going to bother to rinse it out or anything like that. Again, over a medium-high fire, that same kind of high fire. And because a lot of the fat was absorbed in this last, I'm just going to put another spoonful in here. And let that melt in and get really hot. And then we want to be able to put a little bit of this mixture in there and hear a good sizzle. Then we know that it's ready to go for the heat-wise, so that this will cook quickly down. That's what we're looking for here. So there's little bits and pieces in my pan. I'm sure there's bits and pieces in your pan too. So I didn't want to take the time to rinse it out or anything. I don't think that's necessary, but you don't want the pieces in here to burn either. So we've got this heating up. I'm going to put just a drop. You're hearing sizzle now, okay? So we'll pour all of this in here, stirring like that. Get it all in there. And let's just let it cook down now over this medium-high fire until it is really thick, okay? I know for a lot of you that have cooked with me before, this is a standard method for cooking down the base of a sauce in Mexican cooking. But for those of you that are new to this, it may seem a little odd, but there's magic happening here, okay? When you cook all of these things down, you bring all the, you just basically are fusing all the flavors together. And if I were just to put some stock in here and just let it simmer, it would not have this rich, round flavor that is balanced. It would taste really out of balance with tanginess. And cooking down here brings out sweetness that balances the natural tanginess that you find in tomatillos. That's one of the reasons we roast them and not boil them, because the roasting of it will bring out their natural sweetness or add sweetness by caramelizing natural sugars that are in them. So we're just going to cook this down a little bit. While that's cooking down there, let's go over and talk about squash here. Okay, so I have these things from the farmer's market. I have this one that's called a lemon squash that is growing out in my backyard right now. And so I picked one of those guys. But I will say that that's this one here. These are patty pans that a local farmer grows here. And this is just a yellow, but not a crookneck squash. And I actually like this one better than the crookneck squash. Crooknecks are kind of, I will say, just a little bit watery for me, and this one is not. So this is the one I'm going to use today. And we want to cut the pieces, the planks of this. So we've got, like, I'm going to say that that's about a ½ an inch on our pieces of halibut that we're using here, boneless, skinless fillet. But these I want to make just a little bit less than a ½ an inch. I think that's the best size for the cooking, or you could think of this as a little more than a ½ an inch, a little less than a ½ an inch. I'm going to put another piece of it in there. I'm only doing sort of half of each one of these things. But it seems to work out good if you have a £1.5 of the summer squash, something that you could cut like that. And for this, I'm going to salt it. We don't salt, I don't need to salt the fish. But these are really bland if you don't salt them and then flip them over. So if you're working with the squash, that's my recommendation, is to salt both sides of it. Okay, so we'll come back to these guys in a minute here. We've got the fish out sitting over there. Let's look at our sauce base now. I always tell you, you should be stirring this regularly. So for me, that's going to mean every minute and a half or so. You don't want it to stick on the bottom and actually darken, but you can see how this is getting so much thicker now. It's almost to the stage that I want it to be. But I think this, while I'm letting this cook down a little bit more, I'm going to ask for some questions if we have any from our cook-along partners here. Do we have anything?
Linda Hine asked which kind of tomatillo you like best.
Okay, so that's a great, well, thank you, Linda. Thank you for joining us today. It was actually Linda's inspiration of how much she liked this dish when this is a variation on the version that I published in Mexico, One Plate at a Time, I don't know, 100 years ago. And it was Linda came to me afterwards and said, that's like my favorite thing in the book. In the book is this fish that is coated with the cornflakes. So I saw Linda just this last week and I said, you were my inspiration. I remembered that. And so I've rewritten this recipe in a slightly different style. So there's a lot of different types of tomatillos. There are the big commercial ones, which is what I'm using here today, and it's what most people will be able to get their hands on. But in your Mexican grocery store, you will find the ones that are called tomate milpero or tomate de milpa. That word tomate may confuse you because you may think of tomate as being a tomato, but especially in central Mexico, a tomato is called a jitomate, and a tomatillo is called a tomate. So in those areas where they use that word tomate, they will call it tomate milpero. And they're smaller and they have a purple blush on them. And they're really beautiful. They are way more complex in flavor than the commercial ones. The commercial ones used to be about that big around. Now you can find commercial ones that are that big around, which is great for the grower. Not so great for the cook, because mostly they've taken the flavor that was in this one and expanded it to one that was that big. So they tend to be a little blander. So I always suggest that you pick the smallest tomatillos that you can do if you're using the commercial ones, or if you come across the milperos, then get those, the purple blush one. In the area around Toluca, in central Mexico, in the state of Mexico, you will find a bright yellow tomatillo. And we've been really trialing them out here to see if we can grow them, and we can. So we have a farmer now growing those bright yellow ones for us, and those are really interesting, but they have a more fruit-like flavor, almost like an apple-like flavor. Okay, I'm where I need to be here, folks, so take a look at this. So as I stir through this pot, you see how thick it is, that I can stir right through it, and as I swipe through it, it doesn't immediately run back together. And I would say if this cooled off, it would be almost the consistency of tomato paste. Now I've called for 2 cups of broth or water. I'm not going to put it all in. I'm going to put 1.5 cups of it in here. And I suggest you do the same thing. That is sort of my strategy for letting this thing sort of simmer to the right consistency. Yes, I could put all 2 cups, but then maybe when we're finished with the rest of the dish, this wouldn't be ready yet. I always say that this needs to simmer for 20 or 30 minutes. We're probably not going to simmer it quite that long. It's not going to make a big difference, but I didn't want to dilute it with all of the broth, just in case it doesn't thicken up enough to be sauce-like consistency. Okay, so here we are with the sauce finished, except for the herb and salt. I'm not going to do the salt yet. I'm using a fairly salty broth here, but I'm going to put the epazote into the mixture. And we'll let that simmer away. Epazote, by the way, is really different. If you're using cilantro, you could put some of it in here now, but not all of it is really, it diminishes some in its flavor as it simmers with something. So some people like to add all of it at the very end. You can make your choice on that. Either way, you're gonna have a delicious sauce, I think. Okay, so our next thing is we gotta bread the fish and the squash that we're working with here. So I'm going to make myself a little bit of room here to do that. I've still got this sauce over a medium-high heat until it comes back to a boil. Then I'm going to turn it down and simmer it over kind of medium-low. Medium to medium-low, because I do need it to reduce just a little bit. So let's talk about sort of regular 3-step breading. I have flour in one dish. And I've got eggs over here in another. I'm going to go ahead and break 3 eggs in here. I've written in the recipe, if you're doing fish only, then you can get by with 2 eggs. But there's more pieces of the squash, so you're best off to have 3 eggs. You may be a little scarce if you don't. Okay, so we'll put these guys in here. And now I'm going to add some salt to this, but I'm actually going to do a measured amount because I want to get enough salt. This is going to be our seasoning on the breading part of it. So I'm going to take a 1/2 teaspoon and add it to, and because I'm doing 3 eggs, I'm going to make that a rounded 1/2 teaspoon. If you're doing 2, just a flat 1/2 teaspoon would be okay. And then just beat that all up. And you want to keep beating this until there's no streaks of white and yellow left. That way it will evenly coat what you're doing. This is something that every cook needs to know, how to do 3-step breading, because it's just one of the glories of the world is this kind of a breading. Now it's oftentimes done with breadcrumbs as the third thing, though there are many people who do different kinds of things on it. In Mexico, they tend to sell these breadcrumbs that are very, very fine, and they do 3-step breading on the classic milanesa, which is pounded pork usually pounded pork, though lots of people do a chicken milanesa. We certainly do that at our restaurants, and it's super popular there. I got my sauce boiling now, so I'm just going to turn it down. And I'm going to take this guy out and put it back in the vein there. So I don't like those really fine breadcrumbs. I don't like the consistency that they give. They don't give enough crunch for me. So I like to use, if I'm going to use breadcrumbs, and this is what we do in all of our restaurants, we use panko. Now, you'll laugh at this because you'll see that my bag of panko that I pull from my cabinet here is all in Korean, because I live near a Korean grocery store here, and they use panko in so much in Korean cooking. So it just says the only word you can read, unless you read Korean, is panko on there. So you know that. But the big bags of panko are so cheap at the Korean grocery store that I like to buy these. Let's look at it. So those of you that don't know what panko looks like, I don't want to drop it all out here. So it is a much coarser crumb, and a lot of them look sort of triangular. And when you use this as the final part of the breading step, they don't ever get completely absorbed in the liquid that we're going to have here. So I'm going to put that back in there because I want to go to the other thing, which is the surprising thing. That is the use of cornflakes. Now, I had never seen cornflakes as a breading until I got to Mexico, and it was mostly in the northwestern corner of Mexico that I saw this, but they even sold cornflake crumbs already done, but we wouldn't really have that opportunity to buy cornflake crumbs. So this is a couple cups of cornflakes here, and you have to make them into crumbs, but that's very easy to do. You could use the back of a measuring cup, or like what I'm doing here, which is just the back of a small bowl. So just crunch them up. And I'm sure that the sound of that is not very pleasing to most people, but it does go pretty fast. I just want to make sure that I get most of the big pieces crushed here. And I don't know of any other way, really. If you try to put this, say, in a food processor to do it, they get way too fine, and they don't have the same visual effect or the same crunch that you would have by doing it by hand like this. Okay, I'm getting down to the end of it. I hope you guys are as well. Of course, with the panko crumbs, all you have to do is put them out. No crunching with those at all.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, certainly.
Several people have said they found cornflake crumbs at Kroger and one of the store I didn't know.
Oh, that is great to know. Well, very good. How fine are those? I want somebody to tell me how fine they are. So one at Kroger and one at where?
What was the other name? We lost it.
Caputo.
Oh, say it again? Caputo.
Caputos. Okay, that's great. Okay, so I'm now where I want to be crumb-wise here with these cornflakes. One last little pass through it. Okay, so let's go to this breading part of it. I don't usually season the flour because I think all the salt falls to the bottom anyway, and so that I rather season well the eggs. So one by one, we're just going to take these pieces and dip them into the flour and then into the egg. So I'm so glad to know that about the cornflake crumbs, because that's something that I would keep here for sure.
Someone also said Kellogg's makes cornflake crumbs.
They make, well, that makes a lot of sense that Kellogg's would make cornflake crumbs. And then you could just put those away or put them into your freezer or something like that. Okay, so once I've gotten all 5 pieces of the of the squash now put over into the cornflake crumbs area. Then I'm just going to sort of pat them with the cornflake crumbs all around.
Someone just asked if you could use crushed tortilla chips.
Well, that's a very good question. I can't answer the tortilla question. Somebody asked, could you use crushed tortilla chips? I don't know if the second frying, see, the cornflakes are not fried and the tortilla chips are fried. So I don't know if the second frying of the tortilla chips would be too much for them and they would burn. So that is something that we would really have to all investigate here. Okay. So I like to just kind of run some over the edges of it too. And then we'll put those guys over there. And then I've got my 2 pieces of halibut. We didn't talk about all the different kinds of fish that you could do, but I will say that pretty much any kind of fish will work with this. If you want a very inexpensive option, then this is the place that you're going to go for tilapia. I'm not a tilapia fan, but once you bread the tilapia like this, it is really delicious. So you could do that, or you could do some nice fish like a snapper. I love striped bass, so it works really well in this. Grouper works quite well this way. So you've got lots of different options here on those things. Now we've got the 2 pieces of fish to do as well. So let me see if I got enough on the sides. I think I do. Okay. So now I'll go back to the fish and do the exact same thing, but that's obviously easier because you have fewer pieces of it. So we'll just move those guys over here so that I can get the crumbs up there. The 2 pieces of fish will go into the flour. Now you want to make sure what you're doing is to basically create a batter here one by one by dipping it into the flour and then into the egg. Now the one thing that you want to always keep in mind here is that once you have finished with your 3-step breading stuff, it should really go away. You shouldn't try to save it. And that's why I always try to tell people to measure out what it is that you do, because you don't want to put this flour back into your flour canister. These eggs they've got a lot of stuff in them now, so you don't really want to put those back into your refrigerator to scramble for breakfast tomorrow. And the cornflakes will have, in this case with the fish, you'll certainly not want to have that hanging around, okay? So that you want to just have the right amount, and I think we've got the right amount here measured out in the recipe so that you can just do a nice job of the crusting of all of this. Okay, that looks good. Now you don't want to, you notice that I'm kind of picking them up in funny ways. And I didn't say anything, but I'm putting them here on a wire rack because I wanted to say that in the recipe, I gave you the best practices. So if you're going to have some people over and you're going to make this dish, then I suggest that you do the breading ahead of time so that you can have the time for the breading to set on the outside. It will do fine just making this straight through, but if you have the time to let this set for a couple of hours in the refrigerator, it will set up the crusting on the outside. Okay, I think we're in good shape there, except that needs a little bit more right in there. Okay, I'm going to get rid of all of these things and we're going to come back and look at our sauce now because we really only have one thing left to make, which is the Esquites. Your hands are probably as dirty as mine are here, just from all of the ingredients that go onto that 3-step breading. I want to use these tongs again in a minute, so I'm going to wash those off as well and put them back here in the disinfectant water. Okay, So now we're ready to go on to the last bit. I'm going to leave it sitting out because we're moving right straight through all of this. But just as a sort of pause, do we have any other questions that I can answer now and let people catch up to the moment here?
Julie asked, how can you make tomatillos less tart?
That's a really good question, Julie, about tomatillos, how to make them less tart. Roast them. Now, a lot of cooks in Mexico will tell you to boil tomatillos, but I don't really like boiling tomatillos because it captures all of their tartness and adds no complexity. And roasting in Mexico is typically done on a comal, a large griddle, and so it's heat that's coming up direct from the bottom, and there's no oil or anything used in that. And they come out very similar to the ones that we did here, but I will say that this method of roasting with the broiler is, and you could do it in a toaster oven, that's what I often do here, but it's just a great way of creating sweetness to balance the natural acid there. That's the only way that I know how to actually temper. But there's one other little trick. If you find tomatillos too tart and you've roasted them and made your sauce out of them, even your salsa out of them, roast the tomatillos to create a little bit more sweetness. But there's another little trick that you can use, and that's to add a pinch of sugar, because the sugar will actually balance the natural acidity as well. So that's a good little trick to have up your sleeve. It's not to make it sweet. It's just to give a little balance that's in there. Okay, now we're going to move on to making the corn esquites. So if you're a person so I'm going to start with fresh corn here. Obviously, took the husks off of it, took all the silk off of it. A lot of you probably buy it like this already in the grocery store, but right now I'm going to say go to the farmer's market because you're going to have a much better experience. This is beautiful bicolor corn, which is usually the sweetest one that you could find in your farmer's market. And my current favorite way to get the kernels cut off the cob is just to cut down where you think that cob is and then flip it over 90 degrees and do that same thing again. Probably a lot of you have seen me use the 2-bowl method, where you work with a small bowl inverted in a large bowl and cut down holding the cob vertically, cut down the cob. But for some reason, I'm kind of into this right now. And I don't find that it's very messy at all. The top needs to be cut separately like that, but you can see that this goes really fast. Now in Mexico, this will surprise some of you that a lot of the corn that's eaten as fresh corn like this is field corn at the milk stage. It's not sweet corn. And most of the people have never even tasted sweet corn in Mexico. Here we're going to find it sweet corn because you can hardly find that, what we called when I was growing up, roasting ears. So that was field corn or grain corn that was harvested when it was still juicy. They called the milk stage. And so if you can find that, you could try it. But if you go to Mexico, you'll notice that all of the fresh corn dishes are made with that kind of corn. And when you're walking down the streets, a lot of the vendors will have a dish called esquites. And it's usually a brothy dish. So it is corn that is cooked, because you really kind of need to cook that field corn. It's the corn that is cooked in water with epazote and green chili. But if you go in Mexico City to the southern suburb of Coyoacán, there's a lot of vendors down there that will be doing esquites of 2 kinds. They'll do the brothy kind that gets topped with a little bit of mayonnaise and a sort of pungent cheese, almost like a Parmesan cheese, and some chili powder on the top of that. And then there'll be the ones that do the same thing but with no broth. It's fried, and that's the version that we're going to do here today. So I'm going to take the sauce and move it over to this burner here and put it back on its medium low there. Move this pan over here, and I actually want this one to be pretty high here, because this fried corn goes really fast and you want to get some char, almost some char on it. So I just got a bowl here to scrape all this corn into so that I can easily get it into the pan. So I scoop it there, and then I'm going to use, you could, again, this, if you a bacon fat to do this dish in, it is so utterly delicious. So think about that. Your oil, or as I'm using this beautiful fresh rendered pork lard. So I'm going to put a couple of tablespoons now into the pan, enough to coat the bottom of the pan nicely. And we'll melt that. And you want to get this one, what I would call, and I wrote in the recipe, shimmering hot, okay? So it's really hot before you put this in so that it starts cooking just immediately and you can start to get that brownness on there. And we will start thinking about frying over here. I'm going to use some of this safflower oil. I wouldn't recommend doing this in lard in anything like that, just because you want a almost neutral oil flavor to the beautiful exterior. But you've got to get enough oil in this pan to get to about 1/4 of an inch. Otherwise, the things won't fry on the sides. So it's a little bit of oil, more than what you would be sauteing in, but certainly not as much as what you would be deep frying in at all. Let's see if one of these pieces of corn here is, no, I'm not getting enough of a sear on that. I'm going to turn this back skillet on low, and I would suggest that you do the same thing so you could heat your skillet. Now I'm using a cast iron skillet, the absolute best thing that you could have to, or any kind of heavy skillet to do this kind of frying in. And a lot of people don't know why. I mean, a lot of people turn their back on cast iron because it's really heavy. I don't mind heavy equipment, but you may be one of those people that really minds heavy equipment. So for you, it might not be the best thing to do, but any kind of heavy skillet will usually disperse the heat real evenly across and you won't have very many hot spots. Certainly that's true with a cast iron piece like this one. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of really good sizzling now. So we'll get this all scraped in here. And we've got some pieces of corn popping around now. I think I'm going to use this wooden piece here as my preferred way to keep this stuff moving. First of all, I want to stir it nicely so that I can get everything coated with the fat, so that it'll all brown evenly. This is a place that you might want to do if you're used to flipping things in a pan like that you would do that kind of a flip with it. That's certainly the way that we would do it in a professional kitchen. And if you haven't ever mastered that, my recommendation is go into your backyard or onto your back porch and put some dry beans in the skillet and figure out what that movement is. I will tell you, it's not something that's easy to teach. It's just the movement of the wrist that makes it work, and you have to do this back and forth and up and down at the same time. And so you're kind of like, you're shaking and then you're catching it and flipping it with against the curved side of the pan there. And that's the thing. Again, I'll say, maybe you can go, what I see most people do is they go like this and they want to go up and down like that, but it's actually tilted down a little bit, and then you can have it flip up against that way and come back on itself. Again, it's just something that takes a little bit of practice. I wouldn't suggest doing it in your house because you may end up with beans all over your floor. Okay, so as this stuff is simmering away there, I want to take a look at the sauce. I think my sauce is getting a little thick here. Let me just take a look at it. Actually, it's kind of nice right now. So I've got a beautiful saucy consistency to it. I think that looks really nice. So I'm going to kind of just leave this here. I do need to salt it. So I'm going to start by tasting. My recommendation always, and that's the way I write it in the recipes, taste and salt. If you are working with a salty broth like I am, it's not going to take a ton of salt. So I'm going to sprinkle in about what I think it is, and then stir that and come back to it for another taste and see if I think that I hit my mark. I'm a firm believer in salting a bit at a time, but it needed just a little bit more, and I think that will give me what I'm looking for. I'm not going to add any more broth to it now, but I think I will right before we start our plating. Now that's really good. Okay, we should be getting a little bit of browning going on here. We do have popping corn. I don't know if you guys have popping corn too, but we got a little bit of it going, but we got a little bit of nice browning starting here. One more minute and I'm going to add the chili and the epazote to this. Get those stray pieces in there. Do we have any more questions?
Someone has requested to know what's in your vein. You call it disinfectant water.
Oh, okay. Well, you can do this, like in a restaurant, you would always put the same thing that we would disinfect anything with. So we have a disinfectant. It's the same stuff that goes into a commercial dishwasher to disinfect at the very end. And so you just put a little bit of it in there. But you could also just put a little bit of Clorox if you wanted to put that in there. We do it in a restaurant. You could just do water in there if you wanted to, just so that you have some place to rinse it. But most of us, when we're cooking at home, we just walk to the sink and wash our pieces of equipment that we're working with. But I will say that, like in a restaurant kitchen, you can't stop all the time. You can't stop all the time and do the and wash every piece of equipment. So you just put a disinfectant vein there, and the disinfectant really helps while you're cooking to make sure that you're not going to do cross-contamination from one thing to another. Okay. It is actually like popcorn here. Okay, I'm not going to go much further with this because I'm going to end up with stuff everywhere. I'm going to put the, I think I should do the chili first. I'm going to put about that much. I think these chilies were a little bit big, so I'm going to leave some of it left on the counter here, just enough to give me a nice little bit of heat. It's looking beautiful now. Now this really does remind me of being down in Coyoacán, where they do all of the esquites fritos, and they have the green chili and the epazote in them and all of that. I think it's probably the moment that I can start cleaning up some of these pieces of flying corn here and get them back in the pan where they belong. Okay. Okay, now that's been in there enough to soften. So now I'm going to put the epazote into it, or you might want to put your cilantro in now. Stir that, and I'm turning it off because no more popping corn here. You got a beautiful fry on this. So one of the things that you may notice here is that when I'm cooking, I'm usually cooking with, or I may be cooking with more heat than you're used to. And pardon me, everybody asks sort of like, why does restaurant food always sort of have that extra little something that makes people go, wow, this is so delicious? It's because we're not afraid of heat. And we know how to get a nice browned on something without overcooking it, because we can use a lot of good heat here. I'm going to clean this up here, and we're ready to start frying our fish. If it always looks like I'm throwing everything on the floor here that I'm not using, it's not really going on the floor. It's just going into this compost bowl that I have sitting right over here. So was the question just about the disinfectant water, or yeah, okay.
We have another question.
Yes.
Kaiju is asking, how long can you bread the vegetables
I'm sorry, what was the name?
Kaiju?
Kaiju. Okay, kaiju. You can do this early in the morning for the evening. It's not a bad thing to do it ahead because they may actually look a little moist, but they'll crisp up just like that. Now, in like a commercial situation, a lot of times people will bread one day and fry the next, but they're going to do it in a deep fryer, and it's a little bit of a different experience, but you can get it super crisp, even if you've done it a whole day ahead. I wouldn't recommend for people doing it at home to do it more than the like 4, 5, 6 hours ahead of time. So morning for an evening meal would be all fine. So let's just take a look at this oil that we have back here heating up that has 2 kernels of corn in it, which I think I'm going to have to get out before we go any further. Because I don't want them burning and sticking on anything else. We'll get them back into the right pot. So you got to get the temperature right. How do you get the temperature right with a 1/4 inch of oil in a pan? First of all, you could look at it and you should notice that it's going to have a little bit of a shimmer across the top. And this doesn't have it quite yet. But the most telling way to try this is to pick up one of the pieces that you have here and just try a little edge of it in there, and it should sizzle sharply, and it's not sizzling sharply yet, and so it doesn't have any of the characteristics that I'm looking for this. So I'm going to turn my temperature up a little bit higher just so that I can kind of get to where I need to get to. But I always, when I'm doing pan frying here, look mostly for the shimmer. And then I shouldn't have even tried it with a piece of this because it wasn't to the point that we needed it to be yet. That's going to take another minute or so, but maybe just the right amount of time to add another question. We don't have any more questions? Okay. Well, I wanted to say to everybody, if this is your first time working with us like this, it's really fun. We do all kinds of different things. We'll do some grilling episodes. I'll throw in all kinds of things like cocktails and maybe a quick dessert that you could make. So we're always tackling different things. And these are the recipes you will never see in books because I write them just for us all cooking together and something that we can all sort of get done in an hour or so and have a really nice meal. So if you've enjoyed this, please subscribe and please come back and join us for other events that we're going to be doing. I'm starting to see a little bit of shimmer now on the top of my the oil. So let's try this guy again. Almost, but not quite. But it is starting to give that little bit of a shimmer on the top of it.
Jeff, lots of people want to know the designer of your pendant lights in the back. People are loving those.
Yeah, Igno Mauer. They're made out of paper, and they are. He's a German designer, I believe. He may be Austrian, but I think he's a German designer. And each one of those huge pendant lights there weigh about 5 pounds. But they're just like my favorite things because you literally we have 100-watt bulb in each one of them, and they just shimmer in the room, and they add this beautiful glowy kind of a light. I just love them. They're one of my favorite things, and the fact that they weigh so little and they're made out of paper is just an added little bonus there, I think. Okay.
Shane asked if the corn was parboiled.
No. It's just raw corn, Shane. I'm going to put the last little bit. We've got this cooked down now a little bit too thick, so I'm going to add the last little bit of the broth into it, and I'm going to turn it off now. Okay, we're ready to start our frying here. So we get a nice little sizzle. I am going to go to a pair of tongs to put these guys in here because I will mess up their coating less. And once I get them in here, I turned up the fire to heat the oil. And we've got just a nice amount of room here for these 2 fish fillets. So the temperature will drop when we get all this stuff in there. Let's see about moving this guy down just a little bit. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so the temperature will drop now just a little bit. So I'm going to turn I wanted to keep the fire kind of high as I got everything in there. But now I can drop it just a hair so that I get some really nice cooking done in 2 to 3 minutes. That's kind of what I'm looking for. About 2 to 3 minutes should brown it nicely on one side. Then I'll flip that over. I've got a nice platter. I'm going to do a platter presentation for you here today. This is some of the Talavera pottery from Guanajuato. So one of my favorite pieces, but I don't use it very much, but I thought it would be really perfect for this particular thing. I am going to use a flat bladed spatula here to do the flipping with, but it's not quite ready for that flipping yet. But we're going to put the sauce underneath on this one because I think that it's most beautiful to present these fried pieces on top. So we started over here, so let's take a look and see what we've got. Nice looking. So you can see how that 1/4 inch of oil there was the right amount so that it could cook on the sides. Now our fish pieces are a little harder to turn, so I'm going to use a spatula underneath them to flip them over. Now you might wonder about timing on this. I grew up in a restaurant family, but we didn't talk about some of the finesse of cooking that I later got to. And I will say that we didn't talk about fish cooking in the way that I do now. But there was this period when James Beard was talking about fish cooking, and this is back in the 70s, say, and he always talked about the fish being cooked at 10 minutes per inch. So these are like a little bit over, like 3/4 of an inch. But today we like our fish cooked less than that. So I'm going to say that we should cook this just about 2 to 3 minutes per side. And then it will have that almost like translucent line in the middle. Maybe you like your fish the way that I do, like that. So let's see about these pieces here, the first ones to go in. That's really beautiful. These guys are looking really nice. Now, if you have to cook in batches, don't hesitate to get a wire rack like this set over a baking sheet and then put it into a low oven. These will hold beautifully in a low oven for, let's just say, about 15 or 20 minutes, and they'll stay really crisp and really beautiful. How will we know that this fish is done, okay? So I'm going to give it a little press with my finger. I always say it flakes under firm pressure. So I'm going to use my finger to do that. And if I can press here and I can feel that it's really flaking through, I'm going to say that these are going to take about a minute more. Let's see. I'm going to flip them back over to the first side. This is like my mouth waters. This is one of my favorite dishes.
So Shane asked, what would you serve with this?
This is it. I would serve a first course with these, Shane. And what I would do is something that is very fresh. just a simple salad would be absolutely wonderful. It's tomato season coming in now, so I would do maybe a tomato salad before this. It would be really great. But you have everything that you need here now. And then I would do something on this site. You can see in one of the other cook-alongs where I did this really beautiful fruit that is served with something that's like a zabaione but made with tequila and lime, and it's really fast to make, and then farmer's market fruit. That's just a really delicious thing. Okay, so here we go. Sauce in the plate. For those of you that have seen this recipe in Mexico one plate at a time, you will see that I am more generous right now with the sauce because I just felt like that we needed to have a little more sauce with this. So I'll put a couple pieces of these just shingled like that. We've got the fish ready to come out now.
Gary would like to know, Chef, the drink of choice with this dish.
Okay, my drink of choice here would probably be a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. As a wine, pretty much any kind of beer would go really, really good with this kind of a dish. But I would stay with a white wine for this because I think it would be the most well received. And the Sauvignon Blanc has a sort of beautiful, I would call it a citric element and a grassiness that would be welcome with this kind of a dish. We got our corn Esquites. Just let them fall down into the sauce and everything. And I'm going to go for a little bit of cilantro here as a fine thing. You could use some epazote sprigs if you wanted to, but I'll tell you it's a little strong if it's not cooked into something. But of course, cilantro is not so strong, and so you could just pull off some leaves and let them fall down all over everything. And before I say goodbye to you, and before you get to dig into your beautiful creations, I'm going to say, please send us pictures. You can put it on your social media. You can tag it with Live with Rick. Just a hashtag Live with Rick, and we will find those things. So if you've enjoyed this, please let us know. Please let us see what you created. And that would be, it always warms my heart to see what beautiful creations you guys do. So do we have any last questions that we need to ask here?
I was asking what brand your cast iron is.
This is a piece that's not available anymore, but if you're, it was made by Copco 45 years ago. But I will say that right now, I would say if you're in the mood for a cast iron, I would get a pre-seasoned one from Lodge. Those are really very affordable, very reliable. So just go for that. I wouldn't cook without a 12-inch cast iron skillet. You see me use it all the time, but I just go back to it over and over again. And the pre-seasoned one from Lodge is affordable to get and will do what you need to do. So I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Enjoy what you've created this evening. Stay tuned for more of the cook-alongs. Well, of course, we'll be releasing all kinds of videos, a couple of them a week, so that you can explore different things with us. Lots of technique videos that we've got going as well. And then we're going to do the Ask Me Anything. So please wait for that and tune in. And until then, happy eating.